Sure, Dad, but listen closely.
Dear Mom and Dad, I guess you're kind of worried about me. Well, don't be. I'm not going to tell you where I am, but since I ran away, I've been to a lot of places. I've tried many times before to write this letter, but I couldn't put the words down.
A father, they say, worries about a son, but for his daughter he has dreams. Well, my first dream for you was 16 years ago on that day we brought you home from the hospital. We knew you were something special. Then, years later, in a moment of anger, you cried, "But you don't understand." And I didn't.
Diane Linkletter's mysterious and spectacular death helped spread an urban legend that lives on to this day. You've probably even heard it yourself. Diane was born on Halloween in 1948 and died less than a month before her 21st birthday in a shocking climax to a troubled life. This is Dead in Hollywood. Let's go behind the sign. On October 4th, 1969, 2 months after the Tate and LaBianca murders, Diane Linkletter jumped out of her kitchen window on the 6th floor of her apartment here at the Shoreham Towers, just a block and a half from the Sunset Strip. Diane's death has since passed into the realm of urban legend. 2 factors in Diane's suicide that immediately caught the nation's interest and used to support the popular drug-related urban legend: the girl's identity and the widespread claim that she'd been high on LSD at the time she went out the window. Just imagine your death becoming an urban legend to scare off future generations of teenagers from doing drugs.
It's funny, but I can't remember what our big fight was about the night I left. All I know is that somebody was always putting me down. I was never free to be myself.
There are some who think director John Waters' first talkie was done in poor taste.
Because the local reviewer that hated me in Baltimore said this is my first talkie is also my first sickie.
Waters even calls it the worst of his work.
Now, you experimented by the Diane Linkletter story by using the camera.
Well, experimenting, yeah.
Isn't everything John Waters does consciously tasteless? Isn't that like the point?
His films have been called vile and repulsive, and that's why I love them.
Yeah. Was that you just now singing? Sorry, too loud? No.
Mom thinks that you should sing lead.
What?
Like director Todd Haynes' experimental short, Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, the Diane Linkletter story has reached almost mythological status over the years. The improvised film is accidental. Waters and his friends ad-libbed a story while testing a new sync sound camera. The film, starring Divine as Diane, had a very limited release in the early 1970s, mainly in art houses as a short feature before Pink Flamingos.
That day, Diane Linkletter had committed suicide, so we said, let's shoot this. You know, Divine doesn't even have on a costume. He has a day-old beard and, no makeup and my old bathrobe or something. I don't know where we got the bathrobe. So it was not a real movie, and it still isn't.
The story, if you even want to call it a story, reimagines the day leading up to Diane's death. Diane Linkletter was born on Halloween in 1948 to beloved TV personality Art Linkletter. I've always found him a little creepy and condescending.
Fine, thank you.
You're all in red, and let me see your eyes, and your hair. Your hair is, what happened to your hair?
Art Linkletter was best known as the original host of Kids Say the Darndest Things.
What's the first thing a fireman does when the 4-alarm bell rings?
He pulls up his pants.
He then passed that duty on to Bill Cosby, America's favorite dad and rapist, Can't forget about that.
Since being away, I've met a lot of weirdos, pot smokers, and speed freaks, but I've found out how to tell the beautiful people from the phonies. I might come home someday, but right now I've got to do what's right for me.
Art and Diane won the 1970 Grammy Award for Best Spoken Word Recording for their record, I Love You, Call Collect, which explored the generation gap.
Your generation asks to be left alone. They want it so that each may find his own thing. Well, where is this thing for which you search?
It was released 2 weeks after Diane's death and sold over 200,000 copies in the first 2 months.
Due to the public identifying with Linkletter, Diane's death at the age of 20 came to symbolize a tragedy that could be visited upon any home at any time. No family was safe.
Diane, will you demonstrate, please, with this?
Sure, Dad, but listen closely. Before the tear case.
Diane appeared on TV with her dad and on shows like that of comedian Red Skeleton.
I can hear the air rushing in.
Yes.
Isn't that great?
By most accounts, Diane was an emotionally unstable young woman, overwhelmed by the pressures to succeed, and by her own inability to make much of a mark in the world independent of her family. It's kind of hard to believe now, but when she was alive, the public barely knew her name. On the evening of October 3rd, Diane was on a date at the Griffith Park Observatory with a guy named Robert Reitman. She took all these normal things that any woman would have and took them and created this. Reitman dropped her off back at her apartment around midnight. The clock was ticking. Diane called her friend, director Edward Durston, who lived across the street from her. She sounded very upset and asked him to come over.
Hello?
Durston would be the only witness to Diane's suicide, but he was never considered a suspect. Durston arrived at Diane's around 3 a.m. She baked cookies shortly after his arrival, and they sat up all night talking. 2 years after Diane's suicide, Durston directed the Charles Manson-inspired horror film
I Drink Your Blood.
before shifting his career to hardcore gay porn with Boy Napped and Manhole.
I have not met this young lady. A good many people feel that she will be one of the new stars of the future. She's a new young actress. Would you welcome Carol Wayne?
In 1985, Durston was with actress and Tonight Show regular Carol Wayne when she drowned in less than a foot of water on a Mexican beach.
The girl was something extra, which is probably one of the great understatements of the century. Would you welcome Carol Wayne?
When the acting jobs dried up, Wayne turned to both alcohol and cocaine. Comedian Richard Pryor made a serious effort to help her by promising to cast her in his next film if she checked into rehab first.
Where was I 11 years ago?
Yeah, where were you 11 years ago?
In high school.
Instead, Wayne flew to Mexico with none other than David E. Durston, aka Edward Durston. When Wayne's body was discovered floating in the shallow waters off Santiago Bay, she had no alcohol or drugs in her system. The death was ultimately ruled an accident, but Mexican authorities never got the chance to interview Durston, who had flown back to the US before the body was discovered. History is filled with a lot of really bizarre coincidences, but in the case of Durston, you have to ask yourself, was it just bad luck or was something more sinister going on? Durston told the detectives that at daybreak they went out onto the balcony. This is when Diane saw someone she knew walking a St. Bernard. The dog got off the leash and the man started chasing it down the street. And for some reason, this made Diane hysterical, and Durston had to physically restrain her. He was able to call her brother, and he asked Durston to stay with her until he got there.
I walked into your room last night, and the walls seemed to be asking for the sound of your voice.
Durston returned to Diane's bedroom to find his friend more relaxed. She got up calmly, left the bedroom, and crossed the living room. All the while, Durston followed behind. Diane entered the kitchen and passed the plate with 2 uneaten cookies on it, climbed up on the yellow tile countertop, and proceeded to jump out the window.
Please come back to us. Oh, please come back to us. Please come back to us.
Durston said he tried to grab her twice but fumbled both times. She died with all her belt loops intact. A neighbor in the building across the street was looking out his window and saw Diane in the air, heard a scream, and watched in horror as she hit the sidewalk. Durston called the police before heading down to the lobby, where he called the police a second time.
She went out the window. I tried to grab her, and she went out.
She landed right about here, and this is the exact same telephone pole that was here at the time. Diane didn't die right away. She was transported to USC Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead an hour and a half later.
Mom, don't cry. And Daddy, take care of yourself. No matter what, I'll always love you both.
Sweet and troubled Diane was buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery, Hollywood Hills on October 8, 1969. Art Linkletter was positive his daughter was on acid at the time of her death, saying it wasn't suicide because she wasn't herself. It was murder. But get this, the autopsy report returned showing that Diane had no drugs in her system, not even marijuana or alcohol. She was totally sober at the time of her death. So Linkletter shifted the narrative and blamed his daughter's death on an LSD flashback. After speaking with Durston, detectives were convinced that Diane had been despondent, depressed, and in a manic state at the time of her death. Diane spent the entire night highly emotional and going on about her identity and career and how she couldn't be her own person.
All I know is that somebody was always putting me down. I was never free to be myself.
In the official police report and subsequent interviews with the media, Durston never mentioned Diane taking LSD or that she was experiencing a flashback from an earlier bad trip. So how did the LSD story take root? It's easily traceable. Robert Linkletter, Diane's 24-year-old brother, whom Durston called in the moments leading up to Diane's suicide, told his dad that Durston had told him that Diane was tripping on LSD. Odd then, since Durston never mentioned this important fact to the police or anyone else. Maybe Robert was trying to be a good son and soften the blow when he told his parents that Diane was dead. Whatever the truth of the phone call between Robert and Durston, Robert's account is the source of Diane being on LSD at the time of her death. And Art Linkletter ran with it.
Beatles are one of the worst offenders because they've been the most popular and the most listened to and have sold the most records. And they have included in a great many of their songs, as we all know, complete and total descriptions of drug trips and in mentions of it, and in their own lifestyle, being idols of the kids, have openly admitted, some of them, to taking drugs of all kinds.
The Linkletter family attempted to blur the line between what actually happened to Diane and her use of drugs. Maybe Linkletter felt guilty for not seeing or choosing to ignore the signs of mental illness in his daughter. It's not uncommon for those left behind after a suicide to work to convince others that death was one of misadventure and not the deliberate ending of a life.
Life with Linkletter.
You stated that the greatest drug problem we're facing today is in women over 35. We've gone through the problems, but what are the solutions as you see them in traveling around the country and talking to so many women in that age bracket?
Well, there are many solutions. One, of course, is for women to be more satisfied with not a very exciting life.
Linkletter took the unusual step of blaming an LSD freakout for the death of his daughter and mounting a major public relations campaign against drugs.
Norman Vincent Peale, one of your inspirations in this area?
Yes, he is. He was very important to me when my daughter Diane died, calling me to urge me to speak on drug abuse. My philosophy is really that things turn out best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out.
President Richard Nixon appointed him an advisor on drug policy.
Parents seeking an answer. Their common bond was fear. The scenes they had watched all suggested LSD. And no wonder. This is our culture's newest anxiety. The preoccupation of a growing number of parents who think or know that their children are using LSD.
Diane Linkletter, to set it up, Art Linkletter was this big TV host.
Very right-wing, a friend of Nixon and everything. And he had a show called Kids Say the Darndest Thing, where he tricked children into talking about going to the bathroom while the audience went,
I know.
Yeah, but Diane Linkletter supposedly committed suicide on LSD, so it was a big thing. He put out a record called We Love You, Call Collect Diane, which is in worse taste than my movie. But it came out, and I told this the other night, it's true. On the Watergate tapes they're still releasing, about 10 years ago, they released one where it was Nixon and Art Linkletter conspiring to blame her death on Timothy Leary when she had not had acid for a year. It was bullshit. She wasn't tripping when she did it.
Linkletter and Nixon were comrades in arms against a common enemy, drugs, LSD in particular, and the man that, for both of them, represented the nexus between drug culture and the chaos that had come to engulf the late 1960s.
The message is very simple.
Psychedelic drug advocate and former Harvard professor Timothy Leary.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Linkletter even confronted Leary on the Stanley Siegel show.
Let me also refresh your memory. 9 years ago, Art Linkletter's 21-year-old daughter, or rather 20-year-old daughter, Diane, took a fatal 6-story plunge to her death. You leaving, Dr. Leary? Why are you leaving? Why are you leaving? Seriously, you're not leaving. I want you to sit right here. I want you to sit down. You're not leaving. I want you to sit down.
I'm under arrest.
You're not under arrest. I want you to sit down. Art, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Art? Art Linkletter?
Art, are you there?
He claims that people who manufactured and sold LSD were responsible for her death. Do you think that's true?
Well, later understood he admitted that she hadn't had LSD for several months before that. Now, the relationship between Art Linkletter and his daughter, or the relationship between Art Linkletter, who's made a living for 20 or 30 years making fun of kids, you know, things that happened 10 years ago. Come
Dr.
on.
Leary, do you see any relationship
Come
between
on.
her death caused by in other words, do you think that LSD was a part of her death, the fact that she committed suicide?
How does anyone know? I would say the chances are 1,001 at no.
So
but Art certainly made a lot of money and got on a lot of shows. He got himself into the Nixon White House.
How many?
Riding on the death of his
Dr.
daughter.
Leary, how many?
And I think that's ghoulish.
How many LSD
Ghoulish.
trips? Art, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm sorry we have technical problems. Dr. Timothy Leary is here. Let me ask you this question. I know that Diane died in 1970. What part did LSD play in this in your judgment?
It played a very vital part, and it caused her to become bewildered and agonized about life and take her own life. And in
All right, I think it was you that caused her.
Wait a minute. Dr. Leary?
Your hypocrisy.
All right, no, wait a minute.
And you were riding it. You got to the Nixon White House, didn't you? Because you became,
that got to
on
do
the
with
basis of his daughter's death.
No, wait a minute.
He rides
That's an
into the Nixon-
outrage, Tim.
That's ghoulish.
Oh, stop. I will
That's
throw you off the
ghoulish.
show if you don't listen to these questions from me. Art, let me ask you this.
I know.
Art Linkletter?
Yes.
I apologize to
Would
you.
you take the microphone away from that idiot and let me talk for a minute?
Yes, I will. Go ahead, Art. Tell us what you want to say.
In subsequent investigations following her death, I have absolute definite proof that Diane had mentioned Dr. Leary as one of the reasons why she thought that there was nothing wrong with LSD and believed what he said when he said it was God's gift to young people. And I think that this man, Dr. Leary, I had hoped he would die. I had hoped he would be hung. Then I had hoped he'd stay in prison for life. And now I'm glad he's out as a pitiful example of an aging hippie, a gruesome spectacle of how drugs can ruin a brilliant mind.
There are those who find Art Linkletter a hero for his anti-drug crusade to avenge his daughter's tragic death. Others view Linkletter as a sanctimonious hypocrite who exploited the death of his dead daughter and turned her casket into a podium.
It doesn't bother me at all to know that I cannot run like O.J. Simpson.
Was Diane a drug user with a history of bad trips? None of Diane's friends have ever come forward to back up this claim. It's more likely that Diane's family invented a story, allowing them to present their deceased child as a victim of society's ills. We'll never know what happened in the weeks and days leading up to Diane's death at 10:04 a.m. on October 4th, 1969. David E. Durston died in 2010. Art Linkletter died 20 days later.
It's funny, but I can't remember what our big fight was about the night I left.
Diane's death isn't so much a cautionary tale to keep kids off drugs. It's a warning to parents who need to listen to their kids despite the generation gap.
Come back. Come back before you're trapped in a life that daily grows more aimless and unreal. If you return, we three can reach each other by talking and listening. And I mean the kind of listening that is also tuned to silence.